This is the Yorkshire Businesswoman podcast, supporting, inspiring and promoting women in business.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Freda Shafi, here for the Yorkshire Businesswoman podcast. I'm delighted and honoured to be here today with the CEO of Martin House, Clair Holdsworth. Clair has had a very interesting and inspirational career spanning over 20 years, starting with the NHS, working over 15 years in leadership, transitional roles of leadership, as well as being a physiotherapist. She's currently working as the CEO of Martin House, which is a role that takes her into so many aspects of palliative care and currently fundraising. So, Clair, as I said, I'm delighted to be joined by you today and really excited to talk about the work that you are currently doing and some plans for the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting us. It's a really exciting time to be at Martin House and to be in the role I'm in. We've got lots going on, so I've got lots to talk to you about.
Well, let's start at the beginning, shall we? A physiotherapist by vocation. Is that something that you had in mind when you were at school? How did that come about?
Yeah, definitely. I made the decision to be a physio probably when I was about 14, 15, and for a few reasons, I guess, really. So I was very sporty at school and always wanted to do something that would maybe allow me to work in sport, I think. I really liked biology. It was one of my favourite subjects, and I never really wanted to do anything that meant I'd be just sat behind a desk. I think my parents at the time, my dad always told me that, you work for a long time, so make sure you do something that you enjoy. And my mum always said that she'd wish she'd done something which meant she cared for people. And I think those two things probably at the time did resonate, even though I didn't like to think it did at being sort of a teenager. And I thought about physio. I did think about medicine at one point, but wasn't convinced I would get the A-level grades that I'd need to do medicine. So looked into physio a little bit more and made sort of committed to that. And at the time it was quite difficult to get into. It was quite a popular course to do, so I knew it would be quite challenging. Set my sights on that and managed to get the A-levels that I needed and I qualified in 1998 from Leeds Uni as a physio. So quite calculated. I don't know whether I'd do the same thing again if I was doing it again now, but definitely the path I wanted to follow. So quite fortunate, I guess, because when you do physio and you do your degree, you actually, at the time, was pretty much guaranteed a job as well. So it was quite vocational.
I was about to say, so you knew from the start, really, you had a very kind of tunnel vision when it came to your career path, which is quite rare, actually. I've interviewed quite a few people and almost serendipity sometimes prevails and they fall into different sectors. But it's quite rare to find somebody who's had that single-minded vision and been driven. Obviously, your parents had a lot to do with your career choices, one, your mother being, the influence in care, and your father telling you that you'll be in work a long time. That's really lovely. I like to hear that, and it's true. It doesn't feel like work when you love your job.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think I've probably been very opportunistic from that point onwards. I've never been as driven as to, I definitely didn't go into it thinking I want to be the chief exec of a children's hospice at some point. That was never the plan. But I think what physio gives you is quite a lot of skills. So you end up being quite a good problem solver, I think. You have to do a lot of autonomous thinking and diagnosing, particularly specialised in musculoskeletal physio as a clinician, and so you get a referral that says knee pain and you need to work out why somebody's got knee pain, and I think you get really good at building relationships with people and good communication skills. You meet lots of very different people from different backgrounds, and I think that just really sets you up for being able to get the best out of people, to motivate people. At that point, I'm trying to motivate people to do exercises to make them get better. In my role now, I'm trying to motivate everybody to do a really good job so that, we can deliver the most we possibly can as a charity. So, the skills you learn are definitely not lost.
I think it's brilliant that you have a clinical background, so you understand anatomy, you understand movement, but you also understand the repercussions on the brain. And, it's almost like a no-brainer, for want of a better term, that we know that movement has a huge amount to play in day-to-day kind of well-being and mental health as well. And I'm sure that's something that you explored as part of your training and probably experience in what you do. And like you said, it's not just about somebody coming in with a joint pain. It could be almost psychosomatics. Sometimes it's the brain that triggers a lot of these conditions. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, there are lots of different reasons why people get symptoms, and pain is sometimes not the only symptom. It's probably the symptom most people do present with. I think that, probably more so now than when I first qualified, we understand a lot more about well-being generally and the impacts of mental health on well-being. We were taught that at college, but like I say now, I'm sure that at university, I'm sure that a lot of people, I'm sure they do a lot more with people now around that. For me, in the work that we do now, it's about looking after our clinical team in terms of well-being. So they do an incredibly emotive job, and working in a children's hospice, contrary to popular belief, it's not always sad, but when it is sad, it's quite an emotive place to work. And so we spend a lot of time with the team making sure that we have supervision and reflection time so that they can consider what's happened and talk that through, and so that they don't leave the organisation, holding on to that. It's important that they can go home and, not be thinking about work. So, well-being is incredibly important now. I know it has been, following the pandemic. I think even more so, we do have to spend time acknowledging that all the time.
And like you said, it is really a 360 holistic approach that you've taken, which leads me on to the next question quite nicely, which is around leadership and that transitional leadership. Just define what transitional leadership is, Claire, and the whole idea of, kind of having a full 360 approach to well-being and how that's kind of led to your leadership roles.
Yeah, I think it's a common question, isn't it? People ask you about what is your leadership style, and I always think that I wouldn't really like to describe my leadership style as any one style. I think it's really important that you can flex that and you can be who you need to be, dependent on who your audience is. I always think that I've learned a lot by some of the people who I've been led by. I've probably learned a lot by those that maybe don't do it as well as you would like to have been led than those that are quite good leaders. So I always think it's about taking the good bits that everybody does and trying to replicate that and not do the bad bits, the bits that I've seen. So I think for me, being quite authentic is important in leadership. That's probably the biggest, my biggest driver. I think if you can give somebody praise and you can be, very appreciative of what they've done, you can equally, challenge them if there is something that's not been as good as you would have liked. I would think most people would suggest they know where they are with me, which I also think is quite important. I don't think it's good to be, I think it's good to be quite authentic and be quite honest. maybe a bit too honest sometimes, but then that's better for me than, sort of, being hoodwinked, as it were, almost. So, yeah.
I agree, definitely. And just being amenable and accessible is so important, and probably more so now than ever. We're living in an age where there is more transparency. People are actually more open about everything, especially in the workplace. There's a big push to enable and almost support staff within their roles. And when it comes to looking for a leader, you want somebody that really has the ability to identify and relate really well. For example, you might have people with different needs, from disability, gender, new mums, everything represented in the workplace now, and it's so important. And it's a mammoth task, actually, Claire. So I take my hat off to you that you have to be all these different roles, I guess, and engage and support in a meaningful way. And I think that's probably so important in what you do. I want to actually go back, actually, to your work at the NHS. Do you feel that what you did in the NHS starting out, obviously your visions were set much higher than being just the clinician and doing the diagnostics and then doing the various things that you had to do to, I suppose, make people better. Your sights were set a lot higher. What inspired that? Was it something that you had within you?
I don't know. I suppose when I took my first leadership role, it was really on the back of my boss at the time, Peter Cregan, a great chap who kind of saw something within me, I guess, and suggested I went for this role. And I think what used to happen in the NHS, and we are going back like 25 years now, it used to be like the department elder became the leader. So it was just who'd been there the longest, essentially. And there was an opportunity to come up, and he said to me, I think you should have a go at this. And I was a bit like, I'm not sure. And I remember him saying, well, just come over, because we used to cover quite a few hospital sites, and come over and we'll go to Pinderfields and you can go in the first meeting and see what you think. And actually after it I thought, I think I'll be all right doing this. And I think, at that point, random as it might seem, my predecessor used to do all the stats, adding them up with a calculator and just putting them into a spreadsheet, which I didn't think was a big deal at the time, was just revolutionised, something that she'd taken hours and hours to do. I could sort of churn out relatively quickly, and I think it's just that fresh pair of eyes at the time. I'd obviously got credibility from being a professional and being a clinician, so the team were on board. I really enjoyed, I think in physio you go in three routes. You either become sort of a consultant physio and really go down the clinical route, you go into education and potentially go work at university and teach physio, or you go into a leadership route. And I really enjoyed the teaching part of it, and I think that we got a really good reputation at the time for junior staff coming in, because we used to invest quite a lot in the team. And sort of really look at sort of succession planning and career development. And so I was able to do that, and obviously with a little bit more responsibility for that in a leadership role, that just meant I could do a bit more of that, really. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I felt incredibly loyal to my team, and I think they always knew that I would do my best by them. And that's when we're moving into an era really where all they were trying to do in the NHS at that point was save money. So it was a bit like, can we do what we were doing but with less resource, and then can we do more than we were doing with less resource? And it was really challenging. I spent a lot of time almost trying to protect my team from everything that was going on around us. And I would say culturally within our department it was fantastic. The organisational culture at the time wasn't as good as it could have been because of austerity and everything that people were being put through. So but yeah, it was a great learning platform in quite a bureaucratic, it's quite a big beast, is the NHS.
I know very well firsthand. I'm married to a clinician, so I do understand the challenges. and the frustrations of clinicians, whether it's doctors, physiotherapists, anybody in the NHS, sadly. And over, like you said, 25 years, again, I've seen the changes moving from the primary care trusts and then devolved out into different leadership kind of structures. So again, I take my hat off to you, Claire. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not, and you've definitely risen above and beyond those challenges. Most people do. I know people who have left the NHS because of those constraints, because of the bureaucracy, like you've talked about, the budget constraints. And it's sad, really, because when you spend over 7 years qualifying in a profession which is about care, and to sadly be constricted and almost a kind of a lack of respect for, you know, the job that you're doing is again, it's a challenge. But tell me more about the transition now, Claire, from what you were doing in the NHS. Why palliative care, and why, you know,
children's
hospices? Because it's something that most people would not have the stamina or the heart to cope.
Yeah, I suppose, again, as a clinician, you get to see lots of things from quite an early age. You know, you're doing placements at university where you're sent on to intensive care units, and you grow up quite quickly as a physio, I think, or as any clinician, probably nurses, doctors working in that kind of environment. So you get less fazed by things that would, faze people normally. For me, I just got to a point where in the NHS, my team, I was getting more and more teams given to me to manage, and I was probably in my mid-30s at the point and thought, I'm not so sure I can sustain this for another 30 years, and saw an opportunity to go to my one of my local children's hospices at that point. I knew one of the specialty nurses who worked there, and I went and met their director of clinical services, really liked her, thought quite a big jump, really. I suppose one of the things you get working in any public service at the time was a bit more security. So stepping out of being in like a statutory organisation, public sector, you are sort of, it's a bit of a leap of faith almost to jump into a children's hospice world. But I weighed up all the options and kind of felt like I was young enough to do it. If I didn't like it, I could always go back and find another job, leading in the NHS. I was quite confident of that. So, I went, I decided to make that call and did it. Very, very different. Much more connected to the cause, really felt like, direct impact with what you were doing, which was great. Obviously much smaller organisations, a lot more autonomy, a lot less bureaucracy. So you're in a children's charity, so Martin House has got 12 trustees, and they're sort of who you're reporting to in terms of the governance structure. But that means that, if you want to affect a change, you can do that quite quickly. And for me, that's about us meeting the needs of the people who we're there to support. So it's about, what needs do change. Children's needs change all the times. What are families telling us? How do we need to respond to that? Because the majority of our funding comes from voluntary income, and it's a real responsibility spending that money. It takes a lot for people to raise money, jumping out of planes or whatever it is they might do to raise the money. So it's important that money's spent properly, and we don't, we're not wasteful with that. But it's all much more related to the cause, which I think was one of the things that I find quite, it makes it much more enjoyable, I guess. And the other thing for me is just the variety as well, particularly in my role now. No 2 days are the same.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, it's good.
And the transition, as I was saying, from doing what you were doing in the NHS, it's not necessarily a skill that you would learn, actually. It's something that we possess as human beings. And I would say a lot of it is to do with empathy. A lot of it's to do with interpersonal skills and engaging with human beings on a level that you can't necessarily learn at university. So jumping out of that bureaucratic NHS, very highly structured system into, there was another role that you had before Martin House. Do you think that was a bridge to what you're doing at Martin House? Do you think that supported your transition and some of the skills that you acquired?
Yeah, definitely. So I went into sort of a head of integrated care role at Forget-Me-Not Children's Hospice, much smaller actually than Martin House, so a lot smaller than working in the NHS. I can remember sitting the first morning and getting an email about they'd lost Woody, from Toy Story in the playroom, and I was like,
I can relate to that.
This is quite different to the emails I got in the NHS about saving £1.1 million by next Wednesday and things like that. But it took a little bit of getting used to. But I think the skills in leadership around, how you form relationships, how you get the best out of people are the same regardless of where you work.
I agree.
For me there, it was a relatively new hospice at the time, and there was very little structure in place, and it had sort of organically grown and was growing, and was quite small. So I think that when you've got quite a small organisation, you're a little bit more volatile to change, and so definitely bringing a bit of structure in and processes around things, probably not the bit of leadership that I enjoy the most, was what we needed to do. So we put in a governance structure at the time, got everybody sort of bought into that, so that there was processes and it wasn't just sort of organic because it was growing. And I worked there for 3 years, and it was good. I went to Martin House in an interim role actually, and quickly became the director of clinical services in a bigger children's hospice, and also Martin House is 37 years old, so we're the second ever children's hospice in the whole country. So moved there, and was sort of described as a bit of a sleeping giant to me, so got lots of potential, and there was loads of potential. We've moved leaps and bounds since I started there 8 years ago this summer I started. So and then I got the chief executive role just as the pandemic kicked off in 2020. So
that's, and again, another challenge thrown at you, Claire. So it's been almost the way you make it sound is with ease that you've delivered, and that you've almost manoeuvred and evolved in your various roles and wearing these different hats. And the history of Martin House, please tell me more, because I've been doing some research over this last week and I'm actually quite taken aback. I don't know if our viewers know an awful lot about Martin House and the history of it. 37 years, you say. Tell me more about it.
So it was the second ever children's hospice, behind one down in Oxford called Helen House, and Reverend Richard Seed at the time had seen that and came back up north and realised that we didn't have that provision for children in the north, and it was set up on the site that we're on. They raised the money to actually build the building, and at the time there were, nuns, which is often the case with hospices, sort of the whole Cicely Saunders movement and the hospice movement. So it was, we used to take children from essentially the north of England as the second ever children's hospice. There are now over 40 in the country, so you can see how much it's grown and how much the need is out there. So we provide care for children with life-limiting conditions, and we would take a referral from a 20-week scan if that child's they used to say incompatible with life, if that baby and if a parents choose to progress with a pregnancy, and we would accept a referral right up to a child's 19th birthday. We provide care up to the age of 25, but we tend not to accept children after the age of 19, and that care comes in lots of forms. So we do We do short break support for families, and that can sound quite dismissive, but for a lot of families it can be an absolute lifeline.
It's absolutely not dismissive at all for anybody caring long term, as you said, from birth, from pre-birth. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you register birth defects. So kind of fetuses almost.
And then if the baby is stillborn, we would support the family and bereavement support at that point. But often these children who are identified then are born with extremely complex conditions or conditions that are known, to be that they're going to have a shorter life essentially. We would provide short breaks and crisis respite. A lot of families will turn up just really on their knees. We provide respite if, say, a mum's having another baby, or if a mum's had a shoulder operation, or somebody in the family's unable to care, because obviously a lot of these children can't be looked after by a babysitter, and often they all go, if they go to school, they often go to a special school. So we would then do symptom control stays. So we're really fortunate at Martin House that we've got a 24/7 medical offer, which is quite unusual for a children's hospice. So we've got a team of 6 doctors who work across the week. So we can have children come in to have their medication reviewed, for instance, or if their symptoms are getting worse, which as children grow, things need to change because medication levels need to change. And what we find is that they often respond quite different to being admitted to hospital. So they can come and stay with parents and everybody can get used to whatever the new regime is before they go home with new medication, for instance. We then obviously provide end-of-life support, which is what most people associate with the word hospice. And then when a child has died, we support after death. So we've got 2 cooled bedrooms at Martin House, which is essentially a normal looking bedroom, but it's just kept at a cooler temperature so that a child can be looked after following death, rather than going into a mortuary or a fridge essentially. Parents can stay with them. We find some parents want to go home and know that we're looking after them. Some parents want to go in and read bedtime stories to them because that's what they've always done. Some parents don't really want to see them but just want to know that they're there. And obviously the parents can have start their bereavement support journey with us. We provide bereavement support and family support really to the whole family, so parents, carers, siblings, both when the child is on the caseload and following the child's death, because siblings have quite a difficult journey. If you've got a brother or a sister who's got complex needs, it's probably never quite about you. To go out, it takes a lot for these families to go out, and a lot of the children we look after have lots and lots of equipment that they have to take to go anywhere. So sometimes just for siblings to come together is really nice, and because they are in a group where everybody's in the same as them. And I think when children get to sort of 10, 11, they realise that their brother or sister's not quite as normal as somebody else's brother or sister. So our team can help siblings work that through. We also do things with grandparents, so groups with grandparents and support for grandparents, because they have that different feeling of, this is the wrong order of things, particularly when a child dies. They should go before their child, never mind their grandchild, and they often feel like they should be supporting their child. And it's hard for them to grieve because they need to be strong for their child who's lost their child, as it were. So it's really important that we look after the whole family during that end-of-life period, but also we support families for up to 2 years after the death of a child. So that's what we try and do. We try and do that in the hospice setting at Martin House, but also in the community. And we're very sort of led by what families want. So we try and encourage families, particularly end of life, to have an advanced care plan, which means that they've written down what their wishes are. Most people will have a birth plan, and this is almost the end of that scale. And so if they are picked up by an ambulance, for instance, that they know that they don't want the child to be intubated and to go on to intensive care, or, you know, what the plan is for the child at that point. So, yeah, we're often just working with families to try and meet their needs, and they change quite often, as I'm sure you can imagine. You don't really know what you're going to want to do at that point. So it's important that we're just really flexible and agile to meet their needs.
You've just demonstrated that flexibility and a minefield, Claire, and some of the things you've talked about, I wouldn't have even known they were issues. What you said about the generational aspect of it, a grandparent reflecting on their child losing a child, it's very difficult to fight the tears at this point. So you have to have you must have to have developed quite a lot of resilience in the work you do, Claire, which brings me on to one of the questions I wanted to ask you at the end, but it just seems a natural kind of way in to ask you about the challenges. I know that it takes a huge amount of resilience and a thick skin to cope for so many parents. But when you are in a position of managing that, how do you do that, Claire?
Well, I suppose every family is very different, and the complexities in families is really different. So sometimes it can be grandparents who are main carers for children, but it's just important that we look at the individual needs of every child and make sure that we try and meet those family needs. You know, we have some incredibly complex social situations that children looked after. Some children have got safeguarding needs and are actually looked after children, so they're not with their parents, and you know it is incredibly complex. So it's important that we're professional, that we, from a safeguarding perspective, that we always understand where, you know, what the child's background is. We work really close with social care on that. But equally, when a child's dying, you know, we get one chance to get a child's death right, and it's important for the family then that, you know, however sometimes dysfunctional those families can be, that everybody gets that, you know, that opportunity and that fair opportunity. And that's again where we just have to keep looking after our staff, you know, because sometimes it's not the medical or clinical thing that's really complex. It can be the social aspect of looking after the child that is the most challenging thing that we have to do. But yeah, you know, our care team are very experienced in that, and are led really well clinically, so that, you know, we are always mindful of the impacts it can have.
I'm learning an awful lot, Claire, as I'm sure our viewers will, about the complexity and the minefield and the millions of permutations of end of life, to put it quite bluntly, of care, palliative care for children I would never have known about. And the mental health and support for your staff must be something that is very robust and has to be in place in order to support them as well, which I would never have known about, as I said. Just from a personal vantage point, being of a different cultural background, as I'm sure you are on top of this as well, different cultures, different religions have a diverse approach to end of life, and I know from my perspective what that involves. Again, how do you do that, Claire?
Yeah, so we the NICE guidance, so the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, suggests that for good palliative care you should have clinical, medical, social, psychosocial and spiritual aspects to your team. So we do have spiritual support workers who work within Martin House, who quite often will link with local beliefs leaders, dependent on the family's beliefs and or religious leaders. So we would look in, for instance, with some of the Muslim families that come, we will link with the local imams. The team always get training on what different beliefs would like, and we have a resource of that. So we've got a sanctuary out in our garden where we try and cater for lots of different beliefs, including people who have no belief as well. That's really important. And we know, so a third of our families are from a Southeast Asian background, and that quite often means that when it comes to end of life, that they don't spend time in our cool bedrooms, because religiously it's important that they are able to bury the child before sundown, within 24 hours, but they quite often like to do it the same day wherever possible. So we do have some really close links, and again, we are just led by what the family want at that point in time. I think again, in different cultures, women and men sometimes are allowed to grieve differently. We always try and give people that time, because it can be incredibly difficult sometimes for women to be able to express that grief in the hospice setting, but we're really mindful of whatever needs that family particularly has, and that would be part of the planning with families around what they would like to do. When we look after children following death, that can be sometimes as well if a child's died suddenly, so they're not on our caseload at all, but we've got some very good links now with some of the local hospital mortuaries. So we've had children come who've been involved in road traffic accidents or sporting accidents, drownings, children who've committed suicide, who would stay in our cool bedrooms, so following sudden death. And I think that's another aspect of children's hospice provision that Martin House provides that people are not always aware of. There were 42 children last year who we supported in that way, so it's not a small number either. And again, that's just a different, it's just another part of what we do, really. And it is, going back to meeting people's needs, whether they are cultural, religious, belief-based needs, that it's about just being bespoke to the family, essentially.
How would people know? I mean, is it a referral system, for example? Just what you said about sudden death situations, is that something that would be signposted by?
Yeah, the local mortuary teams are really understand that and understand the impact of that on a family. A lot of the families that we care for who meet the criteria of our caseload are coming to terms with the death of their child right from the point of diagnosis. In a lot of instances, when you get a diagnosis, a life-limiting diagnosis, you're starting to process and going through that grief cycle right from that point of view. Whereas, if you lose a child suddenly, that's thrust upon you very, very quickly. So, being able to just have that time, sometimes just, again, families can be really complex. Just sometimes sheltered from what is normal life is what some families get out of that time. But yeah, you're just very ill prepared for everything that's going to happen to you, and so it's about us supporting people at that point. So the cool bedroom suites are really important, and with a new build that's coming up, they we get 2 whole new suites as part of that as well. So that will, really help revolutionise how we can deliver that care.
As I've said before through this interview, Claire, I've learnt a lot, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of people tuning into this podcast will understand the complexity and the role that you have to adapt to almost on a day-to-day basis. There is no set agenda, and like you said at the beginning, no day is the same. So you hit the ground running with every different situation, and the landscape's changing as well, socially and culturally. So I take my hat off to you for that challenging role, Claire. Leading on to something else which has been in the media recently. So you've teamed up with Gareth Southgate. Now that's exciting. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so Gareth's been involved with the hospice now for quite a few years. I think he came at Christmas going back. It was one of my first Christmases, so probably 7 years ago. And when he was very new into the England men's football manager role, he lives quite locally, and his wife had been involved in helping our glitter ball, which is an amazing event. I'm sure lots of your supporters will like to come to the glitter ball. It's on the 11th of October this year.
You must tell us more about that.
Do.
Yeah.
She used to help, Alison, Gareth's wife, used to help with the glitter ball. And so he knew about the hospice, and I think he decided when he got the role as England men's football manager that he was going to take one local charity and one national charity. And fantastic for us, he chose Martin House as his local charity, so he's really become the ambassador for our Build project that we just launched in the media on Friday. So very exciting, massive project, very ambitious for Martin House, so £21.9 million build.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's huge, really.
And has that money been raised, or is it being raised as we speak?
It's being raised as we speak. We've got we've just got over 3/4 of it, actually. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, some of that has come from reserves, and then we have been working sort of quite hard over the last 12 to 18 months in securing some of the funds through a private part of the fundraising appeal, as it were. But the public launch that we've went out on Friday, hopefully people have seen that. That's about us getting over the line. We've got a £2 million target on the public launch, really. That will help us finish everything off and make sure that we can complete everything. So yeah, Gareth's been absolutely amazing as part of that. He's just
he's a brilliant ambassador.
He's
he really
a great
is.
guy. He's a great guy. He's spent a lot of time at the hospice. He's been to parent bereavement sessions. He's been in with the young people in the teenage wing. He spends time with families every time he comes, and he's really taken the time to understand what we do. And he's just very on board with everything. And he's obviously keen to use his position at the minute in any way positively that he can. And that has been to help us with some of particularly the private events that we've been holding over the last few months, should I say. And then just more recently with the public launch on Friday.
£2 million.
£2 million.
How can we get involved? How can we help? How can we support you and get that £2 million, Claire?
Well, in whatever way you would like, really. I think
I'm inspired. I heard
yeah.
something on the radio on the way in about zipline.
Yep. So if you go onto the Martin House website, it's martinhouse.org.uk/the build, you will see lots and lots of different ways in which you can help us. So we've got some events coming up. So the zipline is the first event on the 17th, 18th and 19th of May, and that's taking place at Escape at Castleford.
I love that place.
Yeah, well, they've opened up, this is like a once ever opportunity to do a zip line from the top of the Escape building right across the car park. Yeah, quite high. You've got to like heights to do this one. Yeah, and to be sponsored to do that, you can just go onto our website and book a slot to take part in that.
So if anybody's listening and watching and wants to do this, now's your chance to sign up on the Martin House website and get yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, you don't have, if you don't want
built
to do,
up for that.
Yeah, it's not going to be for everybody, I don't think, but hopefully it will be really popular. And I think just being around Escape that weekend, there'll be lots going on Martin House. So if you fancy going that way,
is there an age limit, Claire? Because
there is an age limit. You've got to be 10, I think, to do it, and you can't be more than 120 kilos. So that might put some people off at the other end of the scale. And advisably, you don't mind heights, because I think the challenges if people get to the top and then want to pull out, but I think it's obviously some people will just love to do that.
I was in a car full of young teenagers over the weekend, and one of them is a daredevil and loves heights, and I'm pretty sure that he would love to do it.
I think that'll be a hit with the teens and the adrenaline junkies. If that's not your cup of tea, we're launching the big challenge, which is just essentially a fundraising pack where it gives you lots and lots of ideas. You could do a bake sale, you could do a fancy dress party.
That's something up my street.
Yep, there you go.
I like
you don't
to
have
bake.
to jump off of a building.
Cook. So how would I get involved in that?
So again,
then?
have a look on the website, and you can it's called the Big Challenge. That will launch in May, and we'll be trying to get lots of people to do lots of different things, essentially to raise money. If you just want to go on and donate, you can donate an amount of money, or you can buy a brick, or you can fundraise for a brick.
How much is a brick?
A brick is £100.
Okay.
So some people, or you can pay for a brick over 12 months. It's £8 a month, something like that, over 12 months for those people who would like to buy a brick. And if you buy a brick, you can put your name on. It's a virtual wall, should I say? You can put your name on that wall and a picture actually, and that will stay on the Martin House website for forever. I think that's the intention.
Idea.
Yeah, just so people can feel like they're contributing to it that way. And then other event wise, we've got a glitter ball on the 11th of October. So again, if you don't like jumping out of buildings, but you like putting on a nice sparkly dress and coming for a lovely evening. I think our Yorkshire business
women would jump at the chance of being part of that.
And it's other
things
evening
as well. I'm pretty sure that we will engage our Yorkshire Businesswoman network in many things. As I said, from a culinary background, the bake is definitely up my street, so I will be talking to you afterwards about that, Claire.
Excellent. Yeah. Again, it's just pretty much whatever you would like to do, and the events that we put on will change. So if people log on and have a look, you can keep up to date.
Can we bring ideas to you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, if anybody's got
the cogs are turning in my head.
Yeah, good. That's what we like. For us, it's we get incredible support from the Yorkshire public, and this is for me really
we're real
our chance.
As Yorkshire lasses and lads,
good.
aren't we?
We are good. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think for us, it's about, I feel like it's a real privilege to lead an organisation at this point in its journey. And really, it's our chance, as a community in Yorkshire, really to leave a legacy for the next 40 years, because Martin House needs to be there, and the facilities need to be right. The reason why, it's not only is it 37 years old, but children now with life-limiting conditions live much longer with much more complex conditions than they did 20 years ago, never mind 37 years ago. So it is really, about transforming our facilities so we can meet those needs.
Absolutely.
The building.
And like I said, the landscape is changing all the time, and you will need new machinery, new equipment. Life expectancy with it being extended with the complex needs, you're constantly in a state of raising funds, and sustainability of those avenues is something that is very vital, I would imagine.
Yeah. We're trying to raise in total for the capital appeal £12 million, and we've got 10 million from our reserves, which has been, quite sensibly saved by the trustees. Once we've spent all this money, we will have about 6 months running costs left. So sustainable funding is a key part of my role. We get about 20% statutory funding. It was slightly less than that last year.
It's not a huge amount.
It's not a huge amount. Compared to adult hospice provision, it is quite low as well. And so moving forward, it's important that we're able to try and lobby to increase the statutory funding, but also that we keep the voluntary income coming, because it costs £10 million every year to run Martin House.
Just to stand still.
Yeah, just to stand still. So we're trying to raise £8 million.
Just need to keep banging that drum, don't we? And figuring out new ways of sustainable and longevity.
Totally appreciate at this time as well, with the cost of living crisis, that people's ability to give is really limited. But like you say, I think as Yorkshire folk, we're like home is where the heart is and
Home
all
is where
that,
the
you know.
heart is, absolutely.
Yeah, I think these families, so we cared for 520 families last year. It's not a small number of people who are getting support, you know, and I think it's really important that we're here for the next 40 years. So
you talked about the legacy being the next 40 years. I think it's a lot longer,
Yeah.
Claire.
Oh,
I think the legacy will continue way beyond 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, like I say, it's an incredible thing to be part of in lots of different ways, and it just feels like, whilst it's quite stressful running a hospice and, you know, trying to make sure we execute a build, because we are operating on a live site as well, which becomes quite challenging for a whole host of reasons. But
You have to walk around in a hard hat sometimes.
Yeah, if you go onto the building part of it, you do. Yeah, I've got my, they gave me some standard issue steel toe cap boots and a hard hat, which I have muddied up. So yeah, but yeah, it's amazing now the progress. We started in December last year, and the steel structure's gone up now, and they're definitely coming out of the ground, which I think, you know, makes you realise that it's actually happening. And we're hoping that phase 1 will be handed over in December this year, and then we move everything into the new bit and then give up the bit that we're in, which becomes refurbished for a wellbeing wing, and then there's a new build as well. And within phase 2 we will have a hydrotherapy pool and education centre, and the teenage wing, which is 6 bedrooms for those children we look after who are teenagers or older.
It's a huge build,
it's
yes.
big. Yeah, it's a big project.
And I cannot wait to see it, Claire.
Yeah.
I'm going to move on to some Yorkshire questions
Okay,
now,
yeah.
with us being Yorkshire lasses and with it being the Yorkshire Businesswoman Network, who I'm pretty sure you appreciate how much we are fully behind you. You are our chosen charity, and we recently raised some money for you.
Yep, thank you so much for that.
Not
Yeah, it
necessarily
means loads.
millions, but
No,
hopefully
every penny will
counts.
count, 100%, yeah.
And we're looking forward to coming and visiting in May and presenting you with that. But going to the Yorkshire questions, these are quite generic, Claire,
Okay.
so I want to know more about you. We've got a beautiful county, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
God's own.
Yep, definitely.
And I want to ask you about what would you say was your perfect day out in Yorkshire?
Well, you did give me this as a bit of prep, and you know what I've thought about it, and it's extremely hard, I think, to answer this question because it is so lovely right across the board. I've got a bit of an affiliation to North Yorkshire because we used to have a caravan, so we used to go there a lot when I was a child. So I do quite like North Yorkshire, and particularly the East Coast. I think is great. I quite like a day out in Haworth now. I quite like art, and there's some lovely shops. My favourite shop probably in Haworth is the Hawkesby, which is an art shop that's just gorgeous. Shop. Yeah. And I think if you drive from Haworth across to Hebden Bridge, just going over the moors in itself is a lovely drive. And Hebden Bridge is a bit closer to where I was. I was born in Halifax, so it's a bit closer to where I was born. But again, just a nice little town to walk around, so I quite like doing that. I am a bit of a home bird, really, so I live in Calderdale, and I love going to like Cliff Cricket Club, believe it or not, you know, just sitting and watching cricket with a nice view. I think, it's nice and hilly in Yorkshire.
We are very fortunate, aren't we, to have this landscape that we have.
Yeah.
It's akin to nothing else I've visited in the world. So.
And actually going to work every day, I mean, Martin House is... We cover North, West and East Yorkshire, but it's in Boston Spa, which is a lovely place to drive to work. And the gardens at Martin House, when they're not a building site themselves, are gorgeous, you know. So I feel very fortunate that I don't sit and looking at a brick wall every day, you know. We're in a great spot. So, yeah, lots of different places. Sorry, I ducked your question, really.
No, not at all. So you've answered it beautifully. Cricket. And just appreciation of our beautiful landscape, that's more than enough. And that's I suppose where my heart lies, definitely. So, famous Yorkshire person, past, present. Who would you like to sit and have a chat with over dinner, Claire? Could be somebody from the past.
I don't know, maybe Sean Bean from Yorkshire?
He is. Sean Bean is from Yorkshire, one of my favourite actors as well.
Yeah, tale or two to tell. yeah, so I mean, I've got to meet loads of really interesting people doing this job. You know, even sitting at these dinners that I've sat at just recently, and and then most of them have been men, actually, rightly or wrongly so. But there are sort of that sort of quintessential Yorkshireman, who's done good. I think is
we've got quite a few,
interesting.
Haven't
we? Yeah, we have. We've got quite a lot, particularly in business worlds, definitely. Yeah. But famous wise, yeah, probably go Sean Bean, or maybe Joe Root, who plays for England cricket. Yeah, nice guy.
That's fantastic. And again, moving on nicely to somebody that you maybe have had as a mentor, whether that was in real life or just aspirationally. Is there anybody that you would, as a woman or a man, do you look up to? Which is your most aspiring or aspirational idea of a Yorkshire business woman?
Yeah, and again, I was glad you sent me that question, because I could think about that, and probably not one, probably quite a few for different reasons, I guess. A lady who's actually just recently passed away, Jill Galdin, she used to work in the NHS and then went to do lots of private